Darling one, you were born from the sweetest love, cast from the fires of creation, burning bright into the making of your perfect constellations. Head high, my love, never let them diminish you. Stand tall in the power of your love. Break open to the thousands come before you, written in your heart with holy blood. Keep going, my love. Hold tight to the scripture of your inheritance, your dreams born from ancient stone. Weave your magic star of wisdom, breathing life into hollow bones. Courage, my love. Place pain upon your sacred altars. Grow seeds where life has become hopeless. Lend hands to those who fall and falter. Let love be life's greatest opus. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to Dreaming the Ancestors. It's such an honor to be here with everyone, and really excited for today's episode with Nicola Goodall. And this is the sixth episode of the second season, where we're really focusing on uplifting the voices of native Celtic wisdom keepers from the Celtic Isles. And we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube. And a very big welcome to those of you who are here live. Please feel free to say hello in the chat. And remember that you have this wonderful opportunity to ask any questions. So if you have a question as we're going along for Nicola, please feel free to put it in the chat. So with that, I'm going to bring on Nicola to say hello to everyone. So here you are, Nicola. Hi.
Hi, good evening from Edinburgh. It's beautiful here tonight. You're going to watch me getting darker.
So wonderful to have you, Nicola. Blessings.
Wonderful.
So thank you, Nicola. It's so wonderful to have you. And perhaps you could just begin by sharing just a few words about what you do, your work as a doula and what have you, so people can get a sense of the work that you do in the world.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually not working with parents much at all anymore. I'm training a lot. I'm teaching a lot and sharing circles a lot. And the way I'm sort of doing my work now, after working with women for such a long time in their health and the family, of course, is to think about, what needs to be done. That's the way I'm looking at it. We have this lovely caveat in Islamic law. I'm a Muslim, and it's wajib kafahi, and it's a thing that becomes compulsory upon everyone, and when we're studying law, it's always a dead cat somewhere holy, so you see that everyone has to remove it. And I think right now there's a lot of that kind of work that needs to get done. So we started with a doula preparation course at Red Tent, the organization I'm part of, so that birth could be better supported and that relationship could be better nurtured between the family as a new one arrives. And then we realized that, women are just really exhausted after they've had a baby and not looked after well. So we went in and started to train the postpartum doulas, and then we realized that education is so bad. People expect everything to be terrible when they have a baby. So we started the radical educators. Now we've just started the traditional Chinese medicine course to get remedies back in the home. And we have trauma doula training coming up and a massage school. So we're just kind of trying to heal the world over here, basically. One tiny bit at a time, one tiny bit. And with that idea that we can bring back some of these things that used to belong in the home, that used to belong in the community and everyone knew. And I think we're going through these last couple of years, we can see how badly we are in our understanding of nutrition and health and herbs and so on. So yeah, we're just trying to make the world a better place. Looking at the birthing year particularly.
Yes, and I love that it's that work is so focused on the family and the home and women's medicine and community medicine. It's so, so beautiful, and just so excited to have this conversation with you because, yes, it's something that this wisdom is something that is missing from so many of our lives, so many of our families, and I'm certainly very excited to learn.
Fantastic.
So, yes. So before we continue, I would love to just take this moment to guide everyone for a few moments, as we always do in this podcast, to really connect with our inner sense of self and the community that's gathered, and really including our ancestors. So I would love to invite us all to close our eyes in this moment and just begin by imagining yourself gathered around a fire. And imagine that we're having this conversation in the flesh, heart to heart. And we're sitting on the ground and we're gathered around the fire, sharing stories, sharing wisdom. And this is such a natural, intuitive way for us to be together, to be in circle. And I'd really love to hold this vision of us gathered around the fire in circle as we continue this conversation. And to really feel that our ancestors are gathering around us, joining the circle, to be part of this conversation so that they too can experience this wisdom, this medicine. And so I would like to take this moment for Nicola and I to call in our ancestors a little bit more intentionally in this moment. So I will go first. I would like to really honor my ancestors from Scotland in this moment, who are further back in my lineage and who emigrated to Ireland at some point in history. And though my family has lost these stories, I still very much feel the connection to these ancestral lands of Scotland and the lowlands in particular, where my family is likely from. And I really just want to invite these ancestors in, especially the women folk from this part of my lineage, to come and to gather and to really feel the medicine that is going to permeate through this conversation, and acknowledging too that some of the women would have known this way, this wisdom, this beautiful medicine of the home. So I welcome those ancestors into our circle. And I also honor the ancestors of the lands that I'm on, which are the ancestral lands of the Ute and Arapaho people, and the Cheyenne also were frequently in this area as well. So I honor these lands that I stand upon. And I honor all of the ancestors of everyone here who is listening. May we feel our connection and even open our hearts to the truth that we share many ancestors when we go back far enough. Midwives. And with that, I will pass over to you, Nicola.
Thank you. Welcome, Tara. While I'm standing on those lands, we welcome you. I have DNA in every clan in Scotland, so I welcome all of those ancestors in. I come from a traveling people in all directions, so I welcome that movement of knowledge and the conquering spirit, of the Vikings and the travelers, the Irish travelers that I come from that line, the Scottish travelers and the water, the people on the water. I welcome in all my grandmothers and all your grandmothers, because they did know, they had to know. Especially, I have a great grand and she had 22 babies, 22 babies. So grandmother Anne is welcome here. and I ask them to guide this conversation, to bring to fruition what needs to come out today, what everyone needs to hear and learn about today. Welcome, welcome. Felcha, we would say in Gaelic.
Thank you, Nicola. Such a beautiful invocation to begin our conversation. So I would like to just spend just a couple of moments now just speaking about this episode. So the title of this episode is Midwifery, Motherhood and Scottish Folk Medicine. And part of the reason I'm so excited for this episode today is because I have very little knowledge about any of these topics. Often when I do a podcast, I often know something about what we're going to speak about. And really, I really don't know very much about these topics. So, I'm not a mother. My expertise is the Irish tradition, and I don't know anything about midwifery. So I'm really going to be on this learning journey with all of you who are listening. All of these topics interest me so much, and I have so many questions for Nicolas. So this introduction is going to be brief. And I think that all I really want to share in this moment is that I'm very present to the importance and sacredness of midwifery as an ancient wisdom tradition. And I'm aware that there are lots of ancestral practices that have become lost around birthing in Ireland and Britain for a number of reasons, including the witch hunts. So I'm really excited for Nicola to share her wisdom about some of these traditions that have been preserved. And as some of you know, I am very dedicated to Goddess Bridget, who's very much associated with midwifery, and she is known in Scotland as Bride, and I very much honor that aspect of her too. And in folklore, it's said that Bridget, Bride, is present for every birth, and women invoked her during labor for safe passage of their babies, as well as to bless the newborn child after the birth. And there's actually a wonderful Scottish folk ritual that's documented in the Carmina Gadelica, which is a text from the 1800s. And Scottish midwives apparently would stand in the doorway of the house during a birth and brace their hands on the doorframe and chant, "Bride, bride, come in. Your welcome is truly made. May you give relief to the woman." And I just love that some of these beautiful rituals and practices have managed to make it to our modern day. And so I'm really excited to bring Nicola on and just really share some of her beautiful wisdom with all of you. So, Nicola, I would love to begin by hearing a little bit about your personal journey, how you became a doula and how you became interested in Scottish folk medicine, and just how you came to this path.
Sure. So, I mean, in a roundabout kind of a way, really, where I found myself supporting, mothers and babies just in my community. And my sister specifically said to me when I had my first child, go off and find something to do for yourself as well. So I enrolled in a massage course, and started massaging people. And then it was aromatherapy. And then all of a sudden everyone was pregnant and they had babies. And it was just, I think, my age, perhaps, the area I lived and the community I was in, I just found myself naturally there. And I applied for a midwifery degree. That seemed to be the obvious thing to do if I was being pulled in that direction. And at the time, even though I'd been to take a degree at King's College, which is one of our best universities, I didn't turn up for my English language exam at high school, and I didn't have it. Didn't want to go in. I didn't see the point. I've always been quite a radical. I had an English literature qualification, I may add, and my English was fine, but that was the technicality that I didn't get in for. And I started to take that exam, and I love creative writing. I love English. It was fun. And I got halfway through the year, though, and had this epiphany that if I have to jump this nonsense hoop, there will be many more. And how do I feel about possibly having to brutalize people and do things that I don't want to do, as a part of getting that qualification? And just sacked the whole thing one day. I remember the moment on my prayer mat, just, okay, show me another way then, and some other teachers. And they came. one by one, I realized I lived around the corner from Michel Audin, which was a wonderful stroke of luck. He's the most phenomenal teacher. He's famous for water birth, particularly. They just came like one after the other in the most random, circumstances. And I was very thankful to be adopted by an elder traditional midwife who said, "I'm your mummy now," and came from a great line. We have an Arabic word that I was going to use, silsila. It's like your sort of line of teachers, going back. And she was taught by the local indigenous chief's tribe on Mount Hood and a very famous grand elder African American midwife called Margaret Charles Smith. So it was the best line I could have possibly wanted, and she was a Muslim as well. And it was just so wonderful to merge everything together. So I had these two kind of, strains going of like family embodiment, if you like, and passing on, and then also seeking out the knowledge for myself and it being kind of thrust upon me. And I worked prolifically, with families as I was having my own family, like probably too much, actually. I'm a little bit tired now. I'm taking a break. And have definitely am leaning more in the traditional midwifery direction these days, which of course is illegal where I sit. So I can't practice as a midwife in the UK. I can outside and have done on many occasions, but here I can't. So what I'm trying to do really is weave in the parts of traditional midwifery that were dropped with clinical midwifery to bring them back. And the postpartum at the moment is my huge passion, because clinical midwifery on the whole these days in the UK just kind of drops people after they've had the baby, because the services are under such pressure, especially in the last 2 years. So yeah, that's how I ended up sitting here, because I realized that we need more and more and more and more people doing that. So we started to bring them in to share what I've learned, the little bit that I've learned in 20 something years. My adopted mum, Peggy, she always said from her tradition, you're supposed to watch for 20 years and then do for 20 years and then teach. So I feel like a bit of a baby still. I understand now. I'm past the first 20 years. Now I get it, now I get it. I'll be amazing in another, 15. That'll be the best teacher then. So I've just kind of tumbled along. But, I believe this runs through my family line for sure. I'm named after the maternity ward that I'm born in. My mother is named after the midwife that caught her. And there are so many babies, like grandmother Anne there. She's many generations back with 22 children. She had several sets of multiples. If she didn't know how to stop her womb falling out, I'll eat my hat, because she must have known an awful lot. And all of the people around her, you speak to an obstetrician about that scenario, they'd fall on the floor and say it wasn't possible. It's not even possible to have one set of twins with some obstetricians, right? So I really think it rolls down. I'm doing a lot of ancestry work and digging around, but we don't document these things. All right, we don't document what women were doing, just what the head of the household was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
yeah, but I really believe it's not necessarily that even anyone maybe even called themselves a midwife, but that they would have known an awful lot about the things that I spend my days talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for that beautiful insight into some of your journey. And a question that arises for me listening to you is, I would love to better understand the difference between a midwife and a doula, because I'm definitely not clear. And I imagine some of the women listening here are not clear either. So that would be so helpful.
So doula was a term that was coined by a couple of researchers a long time ago. And they realized that having another woman with you when you had a baby that wasn't a member of staff or a family member made a huge difference to outcomes. Like, it chops intervention rates in half, pain scales in half, and brings up breastfeeding rates and happiness, basically. So as they did that body of work and they coined that term, there was a kind of burgeoning movement that happened of people saying, well, let's get them out there. And they chose this Greek word because they were academics. It's up for debate, the word, you know. We've actually got a cohort of red tent doulas in Greece, so I have this conversation quite a lot with them. They've kind of taken it on as kind of hand servant, you know, I'm at your service. But there's also the connotation of bondage with that word, which is entirely inappropriate for all women, I would say, but especially some cohorts of women. So that's the word doula and where it comes from. It's up for debate about what the definition of that is, you know, and you will find our institutions, our doula institutions are very clear that it's non-midwifery like in any description. There's no interfering in any way. You must never fight the institutions, etc. You must just kind of go along and support the woman, often in her very difficult experience that she's having. There's now another cohort of doulas that are, fast electric sliding along to traditional midwifery. They're not, though, practicing clinical midwifery, which is also another thing to distinguish. So you have a band of midwives that use a lot of obstetric things like Doppler to listen to the baby and blood pressure cuffs and medications and so on. And then you have another body that, of course, in the world using herbs and prayers and don't want anything to do with electricity and doctors unless there's a real need. So there's these kind of, similarities mirroring in the two worlds for sure. The clinical midwifery we have today is an extension of as doctors get involved. So as doctors get involved with childbirth and we start dropping midwives and grannies like, hot coals, then we end up with this situation where women, families, humans, if you like, say absolutely not, as a body. So the doctors decide to call it man midwifery with a dash in the middle, man midwifery. And the way they practice with lots of observations and wanting a timeline and a very sort of testosterone wired brain way of doing things change considerably. And the midwifery that we have now is the remnants of that, really, because that man midwifery movement also kind of supported the registration of midwives, which in the UK was kind of stamped by the bishop. So you can imagine how that went, knowing all that you know, and probably the people that you listen to. There were no more incantations and calling for bridie at the door and so on. They were just like, no, witchcraft, no, the devil, no, we're not doing that. That's superstitious. And now here we are, just not really long after, where that's just completely disappeared in Scotland. It's coming slowly. We're championing the charge, right? But you don't really have those traditions that happen anymore. So it's quite a complex thing to answer, but essentially the difference is that the doula is not giving any clinical care. She's giving support. She's standing by as a witness. She's holding the space and calling on everything she can call on to make it happen, right? And also, unfortunately, protecting the birthing person these days, from being violated. There's a lot of violation.
Wow.
Yeah, which is the disgusting thing to have to say, but it's a reality, right? The people are out there talking, we witness it, and the facts and figures are speaking for themselves.
Wow. I'm really struck as you're speaking by a real feeling in my body, actually, and it feels a bit like rage at the ways the patriarchy and the church have come into this incredibly sacred initiation experience of birth and taken away what is most natural, what is most nourishing, what is most supportive, in some of the ways that you just described.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, in Scotland and Ireland, especially Ireland, the midwifery tradition was really kind of hijacked by the Catholic Church. And, I'm sure the news has reached over the ocean to you about what that meant. We have many dead bodies buried in, church institution grounds, and horrific stories of, nuns can make wonderful midwives, of course, but there's a whole lot of them that are there to believe you should suffer during birth, as punishment for your sins. So
Yes.
that's a very complex situation to navigate,
Yes.
and I believe it's influenced the culture, the midwifery culture here hugely. Midwives can be extraordinarily, wonderful, loving beings, but they can also be quite harsh to the laboring person. And I wonder if that's when that came in.
Mm. Yes, for anyone listening who isn't familiar with the Magdalene laundries, is often what they're called, I would very much recommend looking into that history. I actually recently just watched a movie called Philomena, which is
Yes, that's
about,
perfect. It's
yes,
perfect.
it's a great way to learn about
Yeah, it is, because
Mhm.
you understand the individual experience as well by watching that movie, the
Yes.
impact, and also how it travels down. He's the next generation, isn't he, suffering, and that will roll down to his children too. I
Yes,
mean,
so
it's
much
not.
ancestral harm caused by
Yeah.
that horrific part of this history. And one of my questions for you, Nicola, is actually is really about, well, diving a bit deeper into what we already just brought up, which is the way that the patriarchy and the church have really come into the midwifery space. And
Yeah.
something that I learned just recently is that during the witch hunts in Europe, midwives in particular were often persecuted as witches, and the church equated midwifery and women's medicinal knowledge with the practice of witchcraft. So,
Yeah.
as a result, the church imposed restrictions on midwives that required them to be supervised. And the supervisors would ensure that midwives were upholding their religious oath against the practice of witchcraft. And, I can't help but wonder, I mean, it seems obvious to me that this is one of the reasons why more of these traditions haven't been passed on. So, Nicola, I know that you're well versed in the history of the witch hunts, and I'm wondering if you could share some more information about the persecution of midwives in particular.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go and visit a traditional midwife in situ somewhere, you understand it. If she's, really old school and practicing the way that she would have done, way back, generations back, because midwives are there for your whole life, right? Because they're there when you're born, they're there when you have your babies, they're there to tend the dead, and they're also there even now. I'm thinking of, going to visit a friend of mine in that situation, and she's constantly like, oh, I sewed his hand up last week, and oh, I helped this one as well. And they know what's going on. They're also there to look after everyone's sexual health, so they know even another layer of what's going on. So they're actually at the center of the community and wield quite a lot of power, they do. So I can see that if you want to destabilize somewhere, if you can get rid of those traditional midwives, you're, really breaking the fabric of a society if you want to take it over. So I really think that that was part of the thing. And it's easy, isn't it, to blame, someone else for something. So when you start digging into the stories, especially in Scotland, we have the Witchfinder General, right? We kill more people than anyone else because we create this special wicked role where this absolute horror goes around torturing women to try and find witches. And the way that he does it is, I mean, he will put, pins into you, and it's like days without sleep. And of course, eventually what happens is, with a lot of people, they say, I'm not a witch, but Morag is down the road. And if she can provide evidence of, just verbal evidence of Morag and Shona and Mary, and they're all witches, she can get away, and stop being tortured. So that meant for us, that was a very effective way of, taking out a lot of women. And we took out a lot of women in the most horrific ways. We went a few years back to gather in a cave under a church in Fife where they used to keep the women, and it's one of the most unsettling places I've ever been in my life. It's completely pitch black in there. It's carved out of a cave. There's water dripping off the walls. There's puddles on the floor. It's just stone and it's freezing cold. And women would be in there for a very long time, and then probably killed. So they just broke the fabric of society by doing these things, which I think was the intention. No? I don't know. It depends how far you go deep into that and what your thinking was going on at that point. But that those women having that control and the control over the rituals as well, and the which also bonds together the fabric of society. It was a great thing for them to do to achieve what they were trying to achieve. And we've seen it kind of during the Yugoslavian conflict back in the day. Well, we used to call it that, it's not anymore, but they took out the imams, the Bosnian imams, because it's a very easy way to break things down and weaken something. So I think that's probably what was going on. And then the definition of what is Christian is very wide, isn't it? I need to tell you, in America, it's very wide. So, over my career, I've had Orthodox Christians, really practicing Christians not want to use aromatherapy, say, or practice yoga stretches because it's not deemed Christian. So that kind of lopping off of things that are actually in the Bible, not yoga so much, but aromatherapy, of course, is in the Bible all the way through. Jesus is given frankincense and myrrh, right? But still, that pastor, that church that woman was at, said the phrase he used was supernatural, which I thought was a bit ironic because yes, they are supernatural and they work really, really well, and they're given to us by God. But all of this comes into it, people deciding. And we know, America knows, when you let men get involved with women's healthcare, what happens, right? You have to start paying for things you shouldn't have to pay for, and you're cut off from things you should have access for, and your choices are taken away, right?
Yes.
Choices are taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very complex, all of this. It's not really as simple as it's just about having a baby and making sure everyone's physically well. It's a political thing. My favorite Bible verse, and the midwives disobeyed. It's been going on forever. Right? It's been going on for a very long time.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It's really important to hold the complexity of these issues, and you just spoke really beautifully to many different aspects of this and how it's trickled down to us even in modern times. And there's that ancestral trauma as well. And something that I am quite familiar with is, ancestral healing. And this is something that I bring to my work and something that I teach and guide women through. And this whole concept of epigenetics, which has come forward in the past, few decades, I think it is now, is so fascinating, where literally there are gene switches that get turned on and off that affect the baby and even the grandchildren. And there's a very sensitive time for women in this epigenetics process, which is when they're pregnant. Like, they actually show when the woman is pregnant, that is when she's most susceptible to being impacted by this trauma that literally affects the gene switches that then get passed on to her child and maybe even her grandchildren. So yeah, I find this this topic so interesting and multifaceted in all the ways that you've just spoken to. And so we've talked a little bit about how some of these traditions have been broken, I suppose, through the church, through the patriarchy, what have you. So what I'm really interested to know, actually, though, is what has survived, what has, in the Scottish tradition, especially, since that's what you're rooted into so much, what kinds of practices or rituals do we still have, and how do you bring these practices into your work? And, how would our Gaelic ancestors gone through the birthing process? So I would love for you just to share some of your wisdom on this. It really is just so fascinating to me, and I'm sure lots of people listening.
It's pretty bad news, Tara. Like, it's basically almost zero, right, that survived. They're just, I'm sat here, there's a a basket with a Bridget's ribbon on. I can't bring it into camera. It's not quite long enough, but every year my ribbon goes out, right? On Bridget's Eve. After 7 years, it's very powerful medicine, and it's tied on the basket that I bring to births with me. So there are people like me really trying to introduce those little things again. I think probably in my lifetime, they will start to become included again. Scottish people are very proud of their culture. They learn about it. They know about it to some degree, you know, and things are being reclaimed all the time. Gaelic is, you know, on a big it's on Duolingo. I think it was like the fastest climb was Gaelic, and it's a lot of you guys learning it. It's not just us here. So the names are coming back. You know, you go to the school now with the little ones and you see all the pegs and they're all Gaelic names, and it's the same in Ireland too, right? The Gaelic schools are coming up in Ireland too, and of course it's mandatory. You have to learn Gaelic in high school. Gaelic, as we would say in Ireland. But I think it's going to take a very long time for it to be where, so we would do things like the midwives used to walk around the bed 3 times with a piece of burning fir, right, after the birth. We see 3 all the time. You've got the 3 spirals, right, the Norns. I'm sure it had something to do with that. And I think, you know, eventually, as people like to weave things back in, like jumping the broom at a marriage, right? Weaving things back in that were important to their ancestors. I think we'll see a resurgence here. But also it's very hard to find those things again because it's oral tradition. But in Scotland, we do really well with oral tradition. So we have I'm sure you know the website, the Kiss to Riches. Do you know that website? If you don't, I'll send you a link. So the Kiss to Riches is probably the best example, and it's a kind of repository of recordings of elders. And we've done that a lot. We have the Scottish Lullaby Project. We have the Sea Shanty Project. And so it's all there to pick through, you know, and I am picking through it and I am pulling things out. And I'd like to get that, you know, out into the world a bit more, but it's just so very rare. There's little things left, like people will make comment on the shape of a bump, you know, if it's round and wide it's a girl, and if it's pointy it's a boy, and they used to, even in the lifetime of my children, I'm watching this disappear. You know, you'd put a coin in a newborn's hand, but now we're also afraid of germs, and now with the pandemic that'll be over entirely. But that was to bless the baby, you know. I mean, I brought my baby here when she was about 2 months old, my second baby, with her red hair. Everybody loved her, right? She looks about as Merida Scottish as you can get. So she came back absolutely loaded with all these coins. She had so much money. Everywhere we went, they were going down the, like, you know, the wrap I had on in the pram, in her hand, everywhere. All the dirty money. And I'm like, sanitizing her hands afterwards. But there's little things there, and that, you know, really for humans, that kind of thing is vital. You put the coin. I remember as a child having coins put in my hand by my Irish elders, and what that means is you deserve riches, child. You deserve abundance. It's a prayer, right, of well wishing on that child. And what have we lost when we don't have that? The anthropologists will tell you it's everything. It's everything, regardless of whether you believe it to be true or not. What it does in our brain and our society, community, everything is you know, is lost, right? And I think we're realizing that we can't just have a surgical process for this massive transition. You know, it's more than that. It is all that ancestral stuff we were just talking about, right? The epigenetics stuff. If we keep going the way we are, we won't be able to give birth anymore. We're taking ourselves into that world that we've taken pedigree dogs into, you know, where they can't get out because there's been so much surgical birth because they've been trying to breed their heads bigger or whatever. So we need Michel Audin. He has a lot of research. He has the Primal Health database. This is his world now, looking at epigenetics. And that database is full to the brim of research looking at the impacts of what we're doing in the birthing room on society. Much more self-harm, self-killing, violence, you know, the inability to connect, because the birth process and meeting, you know, your parents is your biggest oxytocin bath. And oxytocin, of course, is our hormone of connection and bonding and the ability to love. And the more oxytocin you get, the more receptors you grow, and it just becomes a big love snowball situation. But it's, if you don't get the bathing, you don't get the receptors, and then what sort of person are you out in the world? Not a great one, basically, because you can't connect and you can't love, and you don't have the same, situation that you would have done if you'd have been the baby bathed in love. We're hearing more about this kind of stuff these days. Gabor Mate is, a hero. Michelle O'Donnell is a hero. It's like people are popping off saying these things all over the place. So hopefully that means we're going in the right direction.
Yes. Yes, I was watching a video by Gabor Mate last year, and I think it was him who said this, that, or perhaps it was someone else, but that the first year of a child's life, or first year of your life, is the most impactful to your development. And that if you have, that first year of your life developmentally, if you have great challenge, if you're not surrounded by love and oxytocin, then it's really difficult to recover from that. And yeah, it's just really heartbreaking that is so common. Yes. And I absolutely love what you said about the loss of traditions really being a loss of our humanity, the loss of even the way that we are going to be able to reproduce in future. I've seen horrific stats on infertility, and the direction that we're going in is like, are we even going to be able to reproduce in 50 years from now? So all of this matters so, so much. Something I wanted to ask you about, because I saw this on your Instagram page, was about the seaweed and some of the things. Yeah, yes.
It's so lovely
to hear about that.
It's so lovely. So we have this traditional postpartum course, and they'll come and spend some days with me. But then every other month we have a session where we go in on something. And the last something we went in on was seaweed, and I know all about its nutrition and medicinal values, but I didn't know all about the folk tales. So I went off on a big journey, and I found so much delight around the world, a lot of really beautiful indigenous American things, and got kind of characters and carvings. But in Scotland, one thing that I found, which I loved, is that we also have this divine feminine aspect in the sea. So we're hearing a lot about Ocean and Yomaya, and we have Beyonce in her yellow dress smashing up cars and representing this goddess, this feminine divine principle in the sea. And I uncovered the Scottish version, the Mother of the Sea, and we would go not so long ago, actually, from Bridget's Day on, from the spring tides, and we would perform rituals where we would toss the kelp into the sea in her honor, and ask for her blessing, and I just love that, because the sea is very important in traditional midwifery, because bringing up yin energy is very important when you're pregnant, so that you can birth, because you need to be kind of saturated with the yin energy in the traditions. So I take people to the sea a lot. I live in a port, so it's just down there somewhere. And sometimes we toss seaweed in now and ask for help, and we're very the opposite of that in the West. We're very yangy, because we have to go through all these institutions and systems that are designed for men, white men especially, right? So it's of utmost important somewhere like Scotland, where people are busy working jobs and in a man's world, if you like. So yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's beautiful. And then to think about consuming those products that they're kind of blessings from the sea, literally, and that they're saturated with that energy. I love seaweed. I can't get enough of it. I eat it daily. So I'm bringing the traditions back alone in my kitchen, literally. And you're seeing that, I worked with a very successful chef a couple of years ago around the corner from here, and we were having that conversation about how all this old people's food that we used to talk about as a bit disgusting, like bone broth and seaweed, and it was for paupers, nettles, and so on. It's all coming back now. In the high-end restaurants, you're going to get, your seaweed butter. We've all had seaweed butter on something. So. But it's the realm of the poor person. You know, the oyster, the seaweed, all of those, that for everybody, it's not unachievable. There's a lovely what's the documentary, High on Hog, on Netflix, and they're looking at foodways and, you know, food traveling from Africa to America because of the horrors that have happened. And there was one chef there, and he's got a kind of bee in his bonnet about getting oysters back into the Black community in America, and it not being seen as this thing that you have when you're 5-star somewhere and it's very expensive, because it belongs, you know, to everyone. And he's just on the street. I think he's in New York on the street giving out oysters to people. It's brilliant. I love it. So seaweed, I think, is in that category. It's very good for us. It's, you know, out there in abundance. We can all go and get it. It's a very good respiratory tonic. So, you know, get on it now.
Yes, and so nourishing to new mothers, I'm sure.
Yes, so nourishing. The collagen, the iodine. I mean, there's a long, you know, we spent 3 hours talking about everything that it will do for new mums. So this is, you know, this is healthcare when you can just walk down the road. You know, I've quite frequent occasions walked with a mother on the beach and said, come on, we'll pick that up. You can use that when you have your baby in the bath. That's healthcare, not, you know, to the way we deal with things in cities now. To get access to that sort of healthcare with seaweed and so on, it's going to cost you a lot of money. A seaweed bath in a spa, £120. What's the $150? No, you could just pick it up off the beach and throw it in your bath. You know, it's easy.
Yes. Yeah, I love I get such a feeling from seaweed. I can't really describe it. And I'm very aware of the many people from Ireland and Scotland and other places who that was their livelihood, was to gather seaweed. And I know in Ireland there are different types of seaweed gatherers traditionally, and there's even a song called Doulaman. It goes Doulaman na binyabui, Doulaman gwelach, Doulaman na farraga shebara vi and Aaron. And it's all about the seaweed gathering. And it's this lovely interaction between a mother and her daughter. And it's the seaweed gives me such a special feeling, and it's, as you have just shared too, so nourishing. So this is some of the
It's delicious. Sometimes
delicious.
Right? This one is delicious.
Yes, and this is such important ancestral medicine and women's medicine that we need to be bringing back. And so I just so appreciate this conversation about these ways, about these beautiful traditions. And I just really am so appreciative of this conversation and seeing some really beautiful comments in the chat here too. Someone's sharing, this is the most important discussion and remembering of our time. Thank you, Nicola and Tara. Thank you for receiving whoever, I can't see who that is exactly, but thank you so much for saying that. And I very much agree. And something that I just wanted to dive into just for the next few minutes is the connection between doulas and midwives as opening the gate and being these sacred gatekeepers for life, but also for death. So in the Irish tradition, and maybe this is true in Scotland as well, there are the Mrá Quincha, the keening women, who would have they would have done the rituals at the wakes, at the funerals, to help the soul of who has died to cross into the other world. And that was done through sound, ritual and sound. And I absolutely adore all of the beautiful traditions connected with keening. And when I did a 12-week keening course with my mentor, Mary McLaughlin, she was sharing how many of the keeners would have also been midwives, and that they actually were the midwife of the community. And this is partly why they were so persecuted during the time of the witch hunts, and why keening really died out, because these women were prosecuted because they had such a powerful role in society, which is just what you were saying earlier. So I would just love to hear any thoughts that come to you about this connection between women as the gatekeepers of life and the gatekeepers of death.
Yeah. And you're right. That was a really, really important part of their role. They were the shamans, right? They were the shamans. Like, we had this beautiful evening at the Scottish Storytelling Centre that was around keening and death rituals, and I hadn't met this woman before. You may have met her. She's an Irish elder called Phillida, and she was in a very secluded situation in Ireland. So it was kind of going a bit slower with the trajectory than the rest. So she still remembers the keening women coming, and she got on stage to demonstrate what she saw as a child, and keened over this body. And it looked no different to when I've seen Indigenous people with their ceremony. There was so much of the kind of ushering of the energy along, from one world to the next. A lot of as well as the noises that we associate with grief. So they were ushering through the transition of the soul, right, at both ends. So I mean, I would love to see all of that come back, because it's a very important part in traditional midwifery, all around the world, especially in Australia. Actually, the midwives talk about their role being to really connect with the soul that's coming and tell them, look, man, this is it. I've done it. It's fine. You're just going to spiral out and you're going to live here for a bit and then you're going to go back. That's their job. It's not even, looking at the body and the healthcare, which is what we've made it. The Indigenous medicine traditions tell you that you have the ability to heal 7 generations back and forward with a good birth, right? So they knew that for their role in keeping the whole of society and the ancestors and everybody happy and healthy, that they have to do their best to make that ceremony of birth a good one for that soul coming in, for the parents as well. The shift that will happen with the parents as a result of the good birth of the baby, and the parents being bathed in oxytocin. So it's a shamanic process, midwifery. I actually met somebody recently who's coming out of academia as a high academic midwife, and she's becoming a shaman. And I met a doctor as well that's leaving their practice to become a shaman and a herbalist. And so I hope that there will be some cross-pollination. We've got obstetricians and professors in our red tent. It should be that we can come together as a team and make the best situation for the person in front of us. If they need a surgeon, we need a surgeon, right? But we need a safe one that's not practicing racialized medicine or misogyny or whatever else comes in the mix. So those kind of midwives there, when you watch them work, they are stepping between two worlds, right? Most understandings are that the mother has to go off to the realm of the dead, the realm of the souls, whatever you want to call it, to collect her baby, who may have just had another life or whatever, but they're chilling in another realm, and that woman's got to go and get it. So the midwife is her shaman on her big journey. Right? Anyone that's had a baby, natural childbirth, will tell you it's a big journey to somewhere else and back again. So that it hasn't been lost, because I know many clinical midwives that have respect for that process and journey, but they can't talk about it at work. They can't be open about it. They can't talk to their colleagues about it. The doctor that I was just mentioning was working in infectious diseases during the first year of the pandemic, right? Very, very harsh, and became very upset with how quickly everyone went into sort of disrespecting dead bodies, and because they're busy and whatever else, and started to sing and open the windows and just to whatever with her medical license, and nobody bothered her, and tending to the bodies better. And it's so moving, isn't it? I've said that so many times and I've still got a rush of goosebumps saying it again. So perhaps we can start knitting together a better situation that honors every part of us, not just our anatomy and physiology. Because even what we're doing with obstetrics doesn't even really honor the anatomy and physiology. It comes from this system where just a few doctors away, they were openly saying, women are dirty and broken and it doesn't work properly and they're dirty sinners. So we'll do it for them. We'll manage it for them. That's a very different scene, isn't it, to what I was just talking about? Very different.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Very different.
It really does feel that this sacredness is coming back, though, really wanting
Mm.
to be remembered and reclaimed. And I love how you're talking about, even doctors and surgeons coming into your doula training and bringing that sacredness back in so many different walks of life, and this reverence and respect for life, for death, for the mother, for the feminine.
Yeah.
And something, just my last question for you for today is really about, well, let me begin by saying that I know so many mothers are feeling so isolated and overwhelmed and
Mm.
undervalued and under resourced. And I recently read an article that was basically saying self-care is not enough to fix how burned out mothers are right now. And I realize this could be a whole podcast on its own, but I just wonder if you could share a few words about the importance of mothers being nourished, mind, body, spirit, as from your perspective as a doula. Yeah.
Gaslighting women. We're gaslighting women with all of that. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really make a difference, that you're exhausted and on your own. You should just do a bit of self-care. It's fine. You'll be fine. All you need is a bit of journaling after your trauma or whatever it is that women have just been through, or their abandonment. They've done this huge process of having a baby and then there's no one there to look after them. So I'm trying really hard to encourage especially the postpartum students to go out into their communities and start organizing. Midwives are activists traditionally, and they go out and they do whatever needs to be done. I've got another traditional midwife friend. She landed somewhere, set up a clinic, realized there was no clean water, and she set to work making sure the whole mountain had clean water, right? Organization. So, bringing mothers together so that they can, make support systems for each other. You only need a small handful of people to sign up on a 40 days roster in a community to make sure that a woman has a visit every day and somebody brings a pot of soup and a toy for the other children and takes the dog for a walk, right? All of us can sign up for that. That's really easy. That's what we used to do. My mum came to be with me when I had my baby, so it wasn't gone from my family, and I will do that for my children, right? But if we can get the whole community on board, I'm struck by the deterioration of this so rapidly over my lifetime. When you have a bereavement now, say, or a baby now, it's people from certain communities that will come around with food and so on. The Italians come, the Irish Catholics come, the Muslims come, people that still have that in their ideas, but everybody else is just sort of too busy, can't be bothered and getting into that, well, I'm suffering, you can suffer too mode. So just a bit of organization in the community goes a long way, and teaching people the things that have been lost, how to make bone broth for a new mum. That's over in 10 minutes. I do that all the time to dads, especially. Pete, you're going to be a dad. You need to learn how to cook. She can't cook for you anymore. Let's go. 10 minutes later, he knows how to make really good chicken soup, and he's loved forever by his whole family, and he'll probably teach other people, and maybe he'll teach his sons as well and daughters. So just bringing back healthcare into the family is everything, and I think that's the solution to that problem too. So no one's abandoned and doesn't know how to care for their wounds, and is just sad with no one loving them. And that's a very common postpartum situation. Crying your eyes out. You've got a terrible wound that nobody wants to give you anything to help heal. Everyone's sort of saying things to you like, what do you want to breastfeed for? That's a whole lot of nonsense. You weren't breastfed, you're fine. It's just a barrage, a tsunami, right, of negativity. And so we need to go back to, well done, you've done great, here's your soup, sit down, drink this, I'm rubbing your feet, don't get out of bed, you're not allowed mode. There's a big problem in Europe. It gets really distracted by the world wars. Up until then, we just hold on to it. Humans hold on to it. But then as the world wars happen and we start to go into city living and everyone's moved around and there's more trauma, it disappears.
Nicola, you just cut out for a second. I really want to hear what you just said. You were talking about the world wars, but I didn't totally get all of
Okay,
it.
yeah. So
If you could say it again.
there's a cut with the postpartum that happens, very significant one, as the world wars happen. So because there's so much movement around and there's so much trauma and loss and just difference, and people move into city living more, and this thing happens. But up until that point, humans really hold on to it. They don't let go of it. And in many places they haven't let go of it. We're just talking, of course, about Europeans in our foolishness to run ahead. We don't look back. We leave things behind, right?
Thank you so much. I feel so moved by this conversation, and especially what you just shared about bringing this medicine back into the family and the home, which is where we began this conversation. And it feels so perfect to end it here.
Yeah,
and I can feel how much this is needed, So thank you, Nicola.
My pleasure. It's
Yes.
so wonderful to be here with you, and thanking all of our ancestors that we welcomed in and we released them back to their business.
Yes, thank you. I was just about to say that also. Thank you.
I have to do that sometimes if I forget, and we do this in, training circles and so on. And maybe I'm in an Airbnb with everyone's, a grandfather from 500 years ago swimming around in the room with me. So I have to remember as well to send them away.
Yes, we have to honor them and let them go, and really be intentional in that shift. So yes, really honoring our ancestors who we all called in at the beginning and letting them go, and just really honoring all the medicine that has transpired through this conversation. And Nicola, I would love for you to share with everyone how they can find you, any information you want to offer, your website, etc. Just let people know how they can get in touch with you.
Probably the easiest thing to remember is Red Tent Doulas. So if you Google Red Tent Doulas, you'll find me eventually. You'll find the website and the emails on there. Yeah. And a red tent you must have spoken about before was where women went in their bleeding times to, not have this Orientalist gaze of lying on, couches, smoking opium. I think they were probably in there laughing, telling dirty jokes, getting drunk and sharing stories, sharing wisdoms. So that's why we're the red tent. So yeah, look up Red Tent Doulas and you'll find me.
Wonderful. And thank you to everyone who's been here live with us. I'm seeing some really beautiful comments here that I'm going to go and tend to in just a moment, because it's so beautiful to see how this has been landing for some of you. One woman sharing, this has been so powerful to listen to after recently having a baby. So beautiful. And if you haven't shared yet and you want to share something, please feel free to comment on this video or post in my Dreaming the Ancestors Facebook group. If you're listening to this podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please come and join us in the Dreaming the Ancestors Facebook community. We have such a gorgeous circle of women and a few men as well. And it's such a beautiful place where we really tend to the ancestors. We talk about the ancestors, we share stories, and that's also where this podcast is held live every month. So thank you. And thank you, Nicola, once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful. I'm looking forward to having a look at all your other stuff. I want to see the other guests.
Yes, we've had so many wonderful guests. This podcast has been going for almost, I think it's 2 years now, and there have been different iterations of the podcast and so many wonderful guests. And for those of you who are listening to, you're very welcome to check out my work at tara-wild.com or celticroundhouse.com. Thank you. Blessings to all.